Hello everybody, good morning and welcome to my weekly live Q&A episode 29. My name is Danny Segura. I am a mixed martial arts reporter for MMAJunkie.com, as you may know. Let me turn on the volume here. And yes, welcome to my weekly live Q&A where I answer your questions regarding everything going on in the combat sports world and more. So the way this works, I have asked you guys to submit questions via Twitter, and I will get to those in the beginning part of this video. And then later on, I will take the questions that are on the YouTube live chat and in the later part of this video. So if you didn't get to ask questions via Twitter, no worries. The YouTube live chat is there for you. Yeah, a couple of notes. So these are usually done on Tuesdays. But, dude, I've been so busy. As you guys may know, I took out a Spanish language podcast with MMA Junkie called Hablemos MMA, which I'm very proud of. And I'm very happy about this project, very excited. But as you guys may know, like any new project you embark it requires a lot of work. So I've been super busy and I wasn't able to do one of these weekly live Q&As on its regular day on Tuesdays. Also, this is like the third time I do this on a 10:30 a.m. slot, which I like a little bit better than at night. I get to have some coffee. I'm a little bit more energetic. And yeah, I'm full energy here, so I feel great. That's about it. So as far as what's been going on in the MMA world, a lot has been going on. Actually, this is one of the busiest weeks I think we've had since the pandemic started. Obviously, with UFC Fight Island 3 on Saturday, wrapping up the whole Fight Island series. Or Fight Island series, right? Because they might be back. Then you had also Bellator 242 that weekend, the return of Bellator. Congrats to Bellator for a successful return. And then, we had some controversy with the fights. We got some big fights booked with Khabib and Justin Gaethje fighting in October. And then this weekend, we also have some fights as well. UFC Fight Night on ESPN Plus 31. And yeah, there's just a shit ton to talk about. So let's get right into it. As opposed to last week we had an incredible number of Twitter questions. So many that I didn't even have a chance to answer that many YouTube questions. In fact, I might have answered like two about. This one was quite the opposite. So the person carrying the team here was the Executioner 91. We'll get into his multiple questions here in a second. Also, quick reminder, Anonymous Dude 123 just reminded me the super chat is open. I always forget to throw that out there. So if you guys want to support this channel, want to help it continue to grow and make this whole experience better, feel free to donate whatever you want. No obligation, of course. I think with a like and a subscription, that is sufficient. But if you want to go the extra mile and donate some money, all up to you. I would greatly appreciate it, and it goes to invest in and upgrade this whole experience. So it's a win-win for everybody, right? All right, so let's get right into it, shall we? Right off the bat, I think this is the biggest thing, one of the biggest things that has been going on, and in my opinion, one of the most interesting things going on. So I'm going to read the question and then give you a little bit of background in case you miss kind of what's been going on in the last few days, from what stemmed on Saturday, all right? So the Executioner 91 asks, Dan Hardy is out of the line. Whether he was right or not, you can't have people cage side shouting and approaching the ref on sight. It's completely unprofessional and sets a bad precedent. Look, people disagree with the refs all the time. What if next time the ref is right? What if it gets physical? Hope he gets disciplined for that. Why are people supporting this? Yeah. So this is an interesting one. All right. So before we go into the actual mechanics of the question, I'll give you sort of sum up everything that kind of went down. So on Saturday night, referee Herb Dean was officiating some of the fights at UFC Fight Island 3 in Abu Dhabi. He had two controversial calls. The first one, maybe not as controversial, but it wasn't pretty. That was with Tanner Boser and Rafael Pessoa. Tanner Boser clips Pessoa somewhat like on the eye, looked certainly in the eye area. Pessoa grabs his eye. You can tell he's in pain, and he's not knocked out. He's clearly in all his senses, but he's in a lot of pain. Very much like when Mirko Krokop, connected on Bob Sapp, and Bob Sapp just dropped, like holding his eye. He wasn't out, but he was in pain. And when with these fighters, when you see fighters go down in pain, that means something usually incredibly wrong happened, because these guys are the toughest people on earth, right? They're used to, they're used to taking punches to the face day in, day out, right? So he goes down and he's just kind of against the cage, all shelled up, grabbing his eye. Referee doesn't stop the fight. Maybe a little bit understandable, but it still wasn't pretty. And then Tanner lands a bunch of shots, and then referee finally, Herb Dean, steps in. All right, a bit controversial, but not the craziest thing in the world. Then what happened next was the worst of the two, and probably one of the worst, I think, mistakes that Herb Dean has done in his career, and he's done quite a few. And again, this is nothing personal against Herb Dean. I think he comes off as an actual pretty cool dude, and historically he's been a very good referee. But he has, as of some time, there's been some controversial calls that he's done, and Dan Hardy highlighted them yesterday, which we'll get to that in a second. So anyways, basically, Francisco Trinaldo is fighting Jai Herbert. Pretty even fight in the sense of Trinaldo wins the first round, Herbert wins the second. Third, Herbert's winning, but the fight's still up in the air. If Trinaldo could totally turn things around, right? Trinaldo connects with a mean left. Doesn't fully knock out Herbert, but clearly puts him in a space where he is no longer eligible, no longer able of fighting. His body's stiff, right? His eyes might not be in the back of his head, but he stiffens up. He falls straight down, right? He doesn't brace his fall or anything like that. And when he falls, usually what happens when guys that get flash knocked out, the fall and the hit on the canvas wakes them up. That's why you often see guys go out, they fall, and then they're like, what the hell happened? And all of a sudden the fight's on the ground and they don't even know. But then the fight resets and it's all game there. That didn't happen. Herbert felt stiff and stayed stiff, right? And then once he was on the ground, Trinaldo hovers over him, thinking the referee is going to jump in and stop the fight. He literally just waits for a few seconds. Herb Dean doesn't intervene, so his job is to continue. So he lands a few extra shots on Herbert, and then referee finally steps in and waves the fight. So that was a pretty bad stoppage. If you looked at my Twitter timeline at the time, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like it's clearly he's no longer in the fight. The fight's over, right? Those extra shots are not needed, and they happened. But then that on itself was controversial. But then there was even more controversy, which is the executioner's question here. Dan Hardy, you can hear him on the broadcast yell, "Stop the fight!" Right, and then that's when the whole controversy stemmed. Then referee Herb Dean tells him to settle down. He steps out of the octagon after the fight. Then goes up to him to address him, speaking out, and then they kind of get into a little bit of a dispute, and that's that. And then after that, on Sunday, Herb Dean puts out a video, not specifically addressing Dan Hardy, but I think with the pictures that surfaced from the fight and that clip of them talking, it was pretty obvious that he was addressing him. He was addressing the person that shouted, "Stop the fight," and we know it was Dan Hardy. Basically saying that, like, look, it is, everybody there, because if it's Fight Island and there's no crowd, everyone there is a professional, everyone there has a job to do, and everyone there is expected to stick to their jobs. And not only that, but yelling something like that could be dangerous, because it could get mistaken by a commission member yelling "stop the fight," a corner yelling "stop the fight." So, it was completely unprofessional, and that wasn't cool, and that shouldn't be happening. Then Dan Hardy the next day, Tuesday, so a couple days after, takes to his YouTube account and does a live stream basically explaining his side of things and also breaking down some of Herb Dean's mistakes, not only in that fight, but past mistakes as well. And his whole thing wasn't really a personal attack to Herb Dean, but he was basically just stating that there needs to be more accountability in refereeing. So to the executioner's question, 100%, Herb Dean was right in the sense that Dan Hardy should not be doing that. And Dan Hardy also acknowledged that it wasn't the right approach. Maybe the sentiment was there, the right sentiment was there in the sense of these, we need to get better at officiating, at refereeing, which I think most people can agree on that. But maybe my approach at the time wasn't the correct one, but it was just an automatic response. He said that on his actual stream. I wrote a story about it on MMAJunkie.com. And so 100% Dan Hardy wasn't the wrong about that. Herb Dean was right. because it is problematic. You can interfere with what the referee is doing that night, because it could affect the way he oversees fights moving forward right that night. There's so many other factors. So Dan Hardy was in the wrong about that, and there's not much to discuss specifically about that because he admitted he's wrong. However, I do, for the people that are supporting this, and again, it's people that I think, if you're supporting what Dan Hardy did, you're just not aware of everything that's going on, and you're basically somewhat acting on emotion and not really taking in other factors that are worth considering here. Herb Dean is 100% right. It could get mistaken by a corner's voice, right? Especially Jai Herbert. He's a British fighter, maybe, with the British accent. I'm not saying all British people, have the same tone of speaking, but, it'd be a lot closer than somebody that, say, was Hispanic or American, right? So maybe that could get mistaken, and he could have stopped the fight, and then, if it would have been not a fight that required stoppage, and then the fight would have been stopped because he thought maybe a cornerman was yelling, then that's in itself an issue, and so many problems can arise from that. So Herb Dean was in the right about that. Dan Hardy was wrong, and again, Dan Hardy admitted it on his stream. But I do think there is a bigger point than that. I think the bigger point is asking for accountability. And I think Hardy makes an excellent point. Like, Herb Dean is a good referee, but he certainly made a lot of mistakes, quite a lot in recent times. And there's been no accountability for it. I mean, there hasn't been a statement by a commission, or at least publicly, or at least that we know of. And I think part of accountability is being public, right? If you keep everything within, in some way, there's no accountability, right? So yeah, we've never seen a commission address the stoppage. A commission put out a statement on behalf of the sanctioning body overseeing the event. If the call was truly bad, and we've seen some bad ones, that needs to be addressed, and in a sense of not only admitting that it was a bad call, but also explaining to the referee and explaining to everyone why it was a bad call. So there's an understanding of the mechanics of what made it a bad call. And once you understand that, if a similar scenario repeats in the future, you are able to avoid it. Or if it repeats in the future and you still do it, there is accountability, because, hey, look, we've addressed this before. So since we've addressed this before and it continues happening, now we have a problem with now it's not a mistake, but a reoccurring pattern. And if that's the case, then we need to reassess sort of your role as an official here, because maybe you're not capable, maybe you are not in a position to be doing this job. And that doesn't go against referees in MMA or Herb Dean specifically. That literally happens in every single job ever. From the most professional shit in the world, from working in a restaurant. Look, I've been working in the MMA industry professionally, making a living out of this for about 5 years now. And it's very much like that. If you make a mistake somewhere, you'll be told, hey, you made a mistake. You go, okay, well, I'll learn from it. And you move forward. And if you keep making the mistake, then, it's just like any job. You can obviously have problems, around that. And that's just like any job. I've worked at restaurants. Again, if you keep getting the order wrong, if you're a waiter and you keep getting orders wrong, and they tell you, hey, look, this is what this means when a customer asks for this, and that, and you keep getting your job wrong, then there's questions about whether you should have that job, right? And that goes across any profession. So this is not me trashing on MMA refereeing or Herb Dean specifically, not at all. But I think we can all agree that at some point in our lives, watching MMA, if you're watching this, usually you're probably a hardcore. This stream, we've probably all seen some bad stoppage, right? And the goal is not really to eliminate bad stoppages, because that's impossible. I think, we're humans and people are just going to constantly be making mistakes. That's just part of human nature. But you should always strive for perfection, right? And to do that, you need accountability, and you need to acknowledge mistakes. And often, look, props to referee Herb Dean. he was in no obligation, and this is why there's no accountability. He's in no obligation to answer for his calls. I mean, he didn't have to put out that video, but he did, and I'm glad that he did, because it gave us an insight on his decision making, and in a way, again, I don't agree with the call still, but it gave me a little bit more clarity of where he was coming from, and also it highlighted a bunch of things that maybe I wasn't aware of, that kind of, I'm not saying made the call right, but at least from that incident with Dan Hardy, like, it made a lot more sense when he was talking why it's dangerous to have someone yell those kinds of things, in the middle of a fight, right? So yeah, long story short, I do agree with Dan Hardy. I think I agree with him 100% in the sense of he was wrong in the sense of, calling the fight to be stopped in the middle of the fight. And but I do agree with him also in the sense that there needs to be more accountability in MMA refereeing. And if we want to make this sport as safe as possible, if we want fighters to have long careers, if we want fighters to retire as healthy as possible, right? Because it's fighting, you're going to take some damage. We need to make MMA refereeing better. And part of making MMA refereeing better is not just actually giving the tools for the referee to do his or her job, but also creating accountability and acknowledging mistakes. And I think, not only to the public, but also to the fighters, right? Like, if I'm Jai Herbert, and I don't think he's said anything since the incident, but I'd be pissed. If I were Rafael Pessoa, I'd be pissed. I'm like, dude, I was out. Like, do I have to tap out on the mat? Like, do I have to go to that extent? Like, your job here is to protect me. Your job is here to protect both competitors at all times. And if you're not doing that, you're failing at your job. So, I guess that answers your question, hopefully, Executioner. But hopefully we don't see any more of those incidents where people are yelling out in the middle of fights, because it does create a pretty ugly precedent. Because then what stops from, once you cross the line of, I guess, disrespecting an official, what more people are more likely to cross the line, right? Simple as that. I mean, look at something as like jaywalking. That's like a rule, right? You can't cross a street while the light is green, right? But people do it, and enough people did it that it doesn't even matter, and it's not even a law that people enforce. So if that happens more, and I know I'm taking things to an extreme, but if that happens more, then what's there from a corner, an opposite corner, that their fighter's winning, yelling, "Hey, stop the fight," for their fighter to get a W, and what if the other fighter's still in it? And that could influence the referee's decision to stop the fight early. So again, it could create an ugly precedent, but I think we're not in a danger zone where it's headed that way. I think this is the first incident that it ever happens, and the person that was involved in the incident, Dan Hardy, acknowledged that it's not right. So I think that's where we're at right now with that. But there needs to be accountability, and I encourage you guys to check out Dan Hardy's breakdown, because he did a great job at providing facts and information and having an organized and informed discussion about this, rather than getting emotional and yelling and all that, which happens pretty much in today's world, across any spectrum of life, really. Discussion is being eliminated in the world. Or so it seems. All right. Again, like I said, the Executioner 91 carrying the team here. Y'all need to step up. With another great question, and he asks, if Werdum fights his fight, he is almost unbeatable. But in many fights, he tends to lean on his striking. Why do so many fighters that are exceptional in one skill start heavily using another aspect of MMA? He gives examples of Fabricio Werdum, Yoel Romero, Hendricks, Cejudo, just to mention a few. And interestingly enough, all those examples are great grapplers / wrestlers that decided to strike in their career. You usually don't see it the other way around, right? That's usually the storyline here. It's usually great grapplers deciding to strike, and then you go, why the hell don't you take things to the ground? Why are you striking? Take things to the ground. That's where you're good at. But you never see it the other way around. You never see very few. There's like maybe a few instances that I can mention at the top of my head. You never really see a great striker engaging in wrestling. And then you'd be like, why the hell didn't you strike? You're such a good striker. Think things that come to mind, remember when Thiago Alves fought Martin Kampmann, and Thiago Alves was lighting up Martin Kampmann on the feet. And then with a few seconds remaining of the final round of their fight, for whatever reason, Thiago Alves, this is an old school fight too, decides to shoot a double leg. When he was piecing Martin Kampmann up, there was no indication that Alves was in danger or that he was in danger of getting knocked out. And then he goes out there and shoots the double, gets caught in a guillotine, and loses the fight, a fight he was completely dominating. That's one example I can think of out of the top of my head. Another example that I can think of the top of my head was Anthony Rumble Johnson in the rematch with Daniel Cormier, engaging in the clinch and starting to wrestle with Cormier when his corner was specifically yelling at him, don't wrestle. And as soon as he started wrestling, Henry Hooft goes, boom, what the hell are you doing? And then obviously DC's a superior wrestler, wins the grappling battle, gets the back, and gets the submission win. Few instances like that, but for the most part, it's what you mentioned, the executioner. It's great grapplers relying on their striking. And I think there's a couple of things about that. I think, the way MMA is constructed is that in some ways, and I'm not saying this is wrong, I'm just saying how it is. In some ways, it favors a lot the striker, because if you think about it, every time there's a new round kicks in, the fight starts on the feet. Why? Like, think about it. Like, I know it might seem kind of obvious, but that's just because we've been doing this thing for so long. But if you really think about it, why? It's a fight. Fights happen on the ground. Fights happen on the feet. So why isn't it, like, for example, in wrestling, the fight starts neutral, the first period. If it goes to the second period and nobody got pinned, they throw a coin. It's green or red. You have usually a bracelet on your necklace that's green or red. If it lands on your color, they ask you, what do you want? You can go up top. You can start on top position. You can start on bottom, or you can start on neutral. Why isn't it like that? I don't know. That's a good question, right? Like, fights definitely develop on the ground, but if a fight goes to the ground, it's still a fight, right? So why are we choosing to stand the fight up after every round? I don't know, right? So because the MMA is constructed that way, jiu-jitsu guys know that they can't just rely on their jiu-jitsu, and to some degree they have to know striking, because they know that as soon as that round's over, the fight's going to be back on their feet and they're going to have to work their way back to the ground. But to do so, they need to strike first, because that's where the fight has been set. So I think that influences, great grapplers taking on striking. Also, a lot of these great grapplers, like Hendricks, you mentioned, like Werdum in some sort of way, like Homero for sure, even Cejudo, they've found that they have knockout power. So once you have knockout power, Roy Nelson's a great example of it. Used to be a phenomenal grappler, and then all of a sudden his grappling was non-existent and turned into a striker. It's a lot easier to knock someone out than it is to submit someone. The process of submitting someone is a lot lengthier and requires a lot of steps. And in striking, there is a lot of steps as well into baiting someone into doing something so you can, place a punch, a right punch to produce a knockout. But it certainly happens a lot quicker, and I think it's a little less work than jiu-jitsu. In jiu-jitsu, you gotta really, grind and work for these kind of submissions. On top of that, you can strike far longer than you can wrestling. So I think cardio-wise, that is a big reason why fighters tend to stay away from the grappling. Look at Justin Gaethje. He's a phenomenal wrestler, but he specifically chooses not to grapple because his pace is so high that, like, he knows he'll gas himself out if he just grapples the entire fight. But he can strike the entire fight. So I think that's why we see basically exceptional grapplers and wrestlers start becoming strikers. One, because it's a lot easier to end the fight on the feet with a knockout than it is with a submission. Two, because the fight always starts in the feet after every new round, meaning they are forced to learn striking. And third of all is that what was the third one? Whatever I said prior to making this list, but yeah. Because grappling taxes third, because grappling taxes your cardio a lot more than striking. So if you're in a 5-round fight, like, you gotta measure your gas tank, and the best way to do that is to implement some degree of striking, because if you wrestle the entire time, you're going to gas yourself out. Perfect example of that would be Damian Maia versus Rory McDonald. Damian Maia was wrecking Rory McDonald in the grappling department. He grappled way too much, and in the third, gassed, and Rory switched things, turned the tide and won the fight. Or deep into the second, something like that. All right. Third question. This is the final one by the Executioner 91. Till has put himself in a tough spot. He has promoted himself to the point of no return. Despite being a skilled fighter, he has lost 3 of 4. All fights he will get now are ones he can easily ones he can easily lose without looking bad, but still lose. He's just 27. How can such situation be avoided? By proper matchmaking. Look at Sean O'Malley. I think that's a perfect example of matchmaking in the UFC. Now, matchmaking a prospect in the UFC is not always the greatest thing in the world, because the UFC is the premier mixed martial arts organization on the planet. So there's only so much sort of padding. There's only so much developing you can actually do in the promotion. Usually by the time you're in the UFC, obviously, you should always still be evolving no matter what as a fighter, but you should already have a base of skills that are UFC caliber, that are world-class caliber, right? It's almost impossible to fight a tomato can or a scrub in the UFC, unless you're CM Punk and they bring someone specifically from the outside of the organization with very little experience to fight you. Other than that, if you made it to the UFC, you're a good fighter. Also, just a little parentheses unrelated to this question. That's why when any analyst or any pundit or whatever say that a UFC fighter sucks, it's within the parameter of the UFC. Obviously, if you're in the UFC, you do not suck at fighting. You're in the 1% of the world that knows, of the best fighters on the planet, counting all human beings, of course. If you're in the UFC, you're a great fighter, period. And then within that, there's different ranks, right, of skill. But if you're in the UFC, you should already have a base of skill that's pretty good to hang in with world-class fighters, or at least not embarrass yourself, right? So one is being in the promotion. It's hard to develop in the UFC, right? You usually want to do that outside of the promotion. And another one is the matchmaking. Sean O'Malley is a good example, because he's in the UFC, but the UFC has done their best job at possibly giving him time to develop while still challenging him. And even then, he's taken a tough route, because if you look at the opponents that he's fought, they're tough guys. They might not be the best in the world right now, but they're pretty good guys. Not only good in general, but even within UFC within the UFC parameters and considerations, they're still pretty good. Eddie Wineland, I would say he's better than, most. I would say he's better than the average bantamweight. Teco Quiñones, probably better than your average bantamweight, I would say, or right there maybe. I mean, that's a guy that's been in the UFC, that has a winning record in the UFC. That should, it's not 50-50, so that should tell you he's better than average. So he's beating tough guys, but at the same time, guys that are a manageable task, whereas Till, they just catapulted him. Obviously, given the fact that he's a big draw, and they're just giving him guys like Kelvin Gastelum, guys obviously like Robert Whittaker that are extremely skilled. And it's not too late. You can always take a step back with Till and still promote his name, still have him be a big driving force in whatever card they put him in, while still giving him manageable tasks. But again, having the it factor plus a UFC title, that's the ultimate recipe to sell and to be successful in the UFC, right? If you look at all of the most successful fighters in the UFC as far as popularity, for the most part, they all have a belt tied to them. All of them. Conor McGregor, yes, he's got this whole thing and all that, but a belt is really what elevated his status. John Jones, Ronda Rousey, you just name it. The only person that hasn't done that would be Jorge Masvidal, and he's a very rare example. But for the most part, personality tied with championship status equals the ultimate recipe for promotional success, right? As far as having the most visibility and all that. So, the UFC does have an interest in promoting Darren Till and getting him to a spot where he holds a belt, because obviously he's a big name and he's a big draw, specifically for that market that historically has been very important for the UFC. So he is in a rough spot, just 27 years old. I do think he should take a step back. For those that listened to my Spanish podcast on Monday, I suggested a fight with Uriah Hall, whether Uriah Hall wins or loses against Joel Romero, and just have him fight, those type of fights. Put him up against the Brad Tavares, put him up against Derek Brunson, put him up against guys that are between the top 10 and the top 15 for a bit. He's just 27. Do that 2 years, right? He's then 29. 29 is still young. And then once he's got, some knockouts in his record, some wins in his record, a nice highlight reel to promote a big championship fight or a big top 5 fight, then you go that route. But putting him against the best fighters on the planet, and also keep in mind, there's two types of ages in combat sports, right? There's your combat sports age and then your actual age. So you could be like Joel Romero, be, in your 40s and still be fairly young in the sport, because in MMA years you're young. Or you can be like Jose Aldo and be 33, but in MMA years you're ancient. So you gotta manage those two as best as you can, right? Both as a fighter, as a team protecting your fighter, and also as a promoter if you have interest in a specific fighter, in this case Darren Till. So in my opinion, just give Darren Till, I'm not saying easy fights, give him competitive fights, give him fights that test him, but fights that are also that going into it he should be a good favorite going into it, because that's the best way to one, allow him to develop his skills, which obviously he's a very talented fighter, has a lot of natural talent, and two, allow him also to get comfortable in the new weight class that he's in, and also build something, right? If you just put him in all these number one contender spots or fights with the top 5 guys constantly, even if you look good in all these bouts, you can only accumulate so many losses before, things starts I don't want to say look bad on you, but certainly not reflect who you are, right? Because Darren Till should be a lot better than 3-4 in his last 4 performances. I'll say that. All right, next question is by Michael Tero. Now, Michael Tero asked this question on the last live Q&A, and because UFC Fight Island 3 hadn't happened yet, I was like, hold off, my friend. Ask me that when the Fight Island series is over. That way we have a fair pool of contestants to challenge for this Fight Island belt. So his question is, excluding the actual champions, who gets awarded the Fight Island belt? So I think there's an easy one to that, to be honest. A lot of guys had good performances. A lot of guys look good. But you got to go with Khamzat Chimaev. 2-0, 10 days, 2 first-round finishes. And all of a sudden, in the welterweight division, just being, having started your career, less than a month ago, you already have a little bit of a name. You already have at least, maybe not the casuals, but certainly the hardcores keeping an eye on you. You have no idea, and this comes from someone that makes a living out of covering fights. So I would say I'm an expert in the field. Sometimes a lot of guys make their UFC debut and they go unnoticed. And then you see them again on another card and you'd be like, oh, is this guy fighting in the UFC for the first time? And then you go, oh, no, he's actually fought, prior once or twice. And you go, oh, shit, how could I miss that? There's so many fights, so many cards, and so many sometimes not memorable performances that you just kind of forget. But with Khamzat, there's no way about forgetting what he did. Again, 2 wins in 10 days, 2 first-round finishes, and he's got quite a personality, killed it in both of his post-fight interviews. That guy is the Fight Island champion. If you got to somehow... who got the most out of this Fight Island experience without obviously counting the champions, because they leave with a belt, obviously? Khamzat did. He left with 2 UFC victories, 2 first-round stoppages, bonuses, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double-check. I'm pretty sure he left with bonuses. Yeah, he left with 1 bonus on the last card. Let me see if he left with another bonus on the fight card prior. Yes. So he left with 2 performance of the night bonuses, 2 first round stoppages, 2 victories in 10 days, and with a little bit of momentum behind his name. That guy is the Fight Island champion, 100%. No doubt. No doubt. Great question, Michael Terrell. All right, Terrence Leverett. I'm not going to go too deep into this question. I don't usually like to dive in deep into politics, but it is relevant, obviously, within our space. And Terrence asks, have you listened to Jorge on the Dan Le Batard show, where they talk about politics? And what are your thoughts living in Miami? You don't have to talk about politics if you don't want to. I would understand. I live in Tampa and never knew the culture was like that down there. Thanks. So basically, I didn't watch the Dan Le Batard discussion with Jorge Masvidal, but I did read a story that my editor, Simon Samano, wrote on MMA Junkie, which was basically recapping that, which was a very interesting conversation. Actually, me and him actually talked about it for a little bit. And, you know, I got to say, one, I appreciate Masvidal being open about it because in today's world, as I mentioned earlier on this video, there's just a lot of yelling at each other and very little discussion in all kinds of facets in MMA, in sports, in politics, whatever. And I think that's a shame because, you know, I think the ultimate way to process through thoughts and get to certain conclusions is through discussion, is through working through thoughts, exchanging ideas, both giving your thoughts on something, having those thoughts be challenged by others, taking information that challenge those ideas. And look, it will either reinforce what you already believe, it'll change your mind on certain perspectives. Maybe you still believe them, but you at least understand the other side. Or maybe you completely, you know, it reinforces what you already believed, or it could change your mind, etc. Discussion is very important in life. And so, yeah, props to Jorge Masvidal, because a lot of people that are in, especially outside of politics, they usually don't want to talk about these things because, you know, it can get ugly, and it can everything's very politicized today, and it can get weird. It can get into a weird territory. So props to Jorge Masvidal for being open and actually having a smart, intelligent discussion about this. And basically, you know, he was explaining his support for Trump, him being a Latino. Obviously, the Latin Hispanics, for the most part, haven't really been huge supporters of Trump, I would say. However, the Cuban community it's an exception to that. And me living in Miami, I saw that throughout the 2016 election, and even prior to that, leading up to it. The Cuban community supports Trump a ton. And basically, like, you know, again, his conversation was very lengthy, and I haven't actually watched the show, just read the transcription from my boss. But I did find it interesting because of his experience of his dad living in a communist regime with Cuba. Basically, like, his experience, the Cubans' experience has kind of been turned off a little bit by Democrats because that's a little closer to socialism than say supporting Trump. So I understand that, and it is like a point of view that, like, I think it's very interesting. I don't agree with it, but again, I don't have that experience because every Latino immigrant has like such a different experience than Cubans, because usually, you know, Hispanics and Latino immigrants move to the U.S. because their government does too little, right? You get a lot of political refugees, where there is, you know, in Central America, tons of gang violence and things of that nature, where the government does very little to help these people out, and they have no option but to, you know, flee for security and flee for safety into the U.S., where they're not being persecuted and they're not being targeted by gangs and these other guerrilla groups as well, right? Whereas in Cuba is the opposite, because it's the government having too much control, doing too much. So it's something I can't relate. So it's hard for me to be like, yo, your points are not valid and this is what it is, because I just don't have that experience. But it is interesting. It is very interesting. I'll listen to the full thing to kind of get a better perspective. All I got to say about that is that it's very interesting. And although I may not agree with it, props to Jorge Masvidal for being open about it. All right, and that was it for the Twitter questions. We got still 15 minutes remaining on this live Q&A, technically. So now I'm going to take things over to the YouTube live chat where you guys have been dropping comments. I keep seeing the little things popping up. And yeah, I'll answer those questions there, all right? What the fuck is happening? All right, there we go. Jason Bass. And Jason asks, where would you like to see Werdum go, and who should he fight? So I went on detail about this on Hablemos MMA, my new Spanish language podcast on MMA Junkie. Check that out. It drops every Monday. This week I interviewed Irene Aldana, who obviously was supposed to fight this weekend in the main event against Holly Holm, but due to testing positive for COVID-19, she was forced to withdraw, and that bout will be postponed to a later date. So a couple of notes about that interview. One, it was really interesting getting Aldana's perspective on her experience dealing with COVID, right? Being a professional athlete, being young, being in the best shape of her life, right? Getting ready for 5 rounds, being a world-class athlete and still experiencing a very rough time. That's her quote, very rough time with the virus. Again, it wasn't bad enough where she needed to go to the hospital or needed a respirator, but it was bad enough where she couldn't train. She said going up and down the stairs, in her house would fatigue her, that alone. She had pretty bad fever. So imagine if the virus can do that to someone that's young and in very, very good shape. Imagine what it could do to someone who has underlying conditions or was obese or in bad shape or older, right? So very interesting to get her perspective, and that was very cool. Also, the UFC is going to keep her fight. It's getting postponed. It's not getting canceled, and it'll still be a main event bout. So it's going to be a main event bout sometime later this year, yet to be determined, but the UFC decided to keep main event status for that fight. So Aldana's very grateful because the moment she sets foot on that octagon, she becomes the first 100% Mexican-born woman to headline a UFC card. So a nice little history for there in her country. So that was very cool. But anyways, so I discussed kind of what's next for Werdum. Obviously, Werdum being a commentator for the Spanish broadcast, very important to that market, very well known in the Hispanic market as well. He speaks 3 languages and his Spanish is quite good, I would say. And yeah, so he fought the last fight of his contract, defeating Alexander Gustafsson via submission, armbar, first round. Looked great doing it, by the way. So when he said that against Olenek, which I thought maybe 42 years old, 2-year layoff, maybe the time has passed Werdum, but him saying he only trained online and he just felt like crap training and he just wasn't ready for that fight, I believe him. Because against Gustafsson, he looked sharp. His timing, everything looked on point. He was able to pull the trigger, which that's often good signs of good training, and still being there. So, Werdum is clearly... I still have questions as to how good is he right now. Is he still the Werdum that won a world title in the UFC? Or is he a little bit less than that? I don't know. But certainly he's still a very, very game fighter, proving that against Gustafsson. And as of what's next for him, I think he could resign to the UFC. I think, he mentioned in the post-fight press conference there that he's interested in a rematch with Fedor. Obviously, he submitted Fedor. I believe he became the first person to ever submit Fedor in Strikeforce. And he's over in Bellator and kind of wrapping up his career. So we'll see. I got to say, and I said it on the podcast, I don't think it makes too much sense for him to stay in the UFC. I mean, he's already been long enough in the UFC that he's already fought every big name. So at this point, it's like trilogies and a bunch of rematches. And then the new guys, like, are you sure you want to fight the new guys? Are you sure you want to fight Curtis Blades? Are you sure you want to fight Francis Ngannou? Those are tough fights. You're 42. Also, the line, if his goal is to get back to a world title, which is how to make the most money, right, having a belt, the line is quite long. I mean, look at Francis Ngannou. How many people has he knocked out and he still hasn't gotten a title shot? Look at Curtis Blades. How many people has he beaten and he still hasn't gotten a title shot? So the line is quite long and the line is quite young as well. So it's going to be tough to get back to a world title in the UFC. I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm just saying it's difficult. And then on top of that, it's not like he's never done that before. So it's like, all right, he still has a dream of becoming a UFC champion. No, you were a pretty successful UFC champ. So you already have that accolade. You can already said you were a former world champion in the UFC. Sure, getting there a second time would be nice, but I think the most important there is doing it the first time, right? Whereas Bellator, he's never won a world title at Bellator. the line at Bellator is a lot shorter to the title, of course. And it's a lot older as well. And there's good names there. Josh Burnett, Fedor Emelianenko, right? There's good name value there that he could be in some big matchups and get to the title a lot quicker. And if he were to win a Bellator belt, he would then be a former UFC champion and a Bellator heavyweight champion. And having that new belt that's not UFC because he already had it, I think it adds more to his legacy than regaining the UFC title, as crazy as that sounds. Like, I just remember when Chris Cyborg, you know, obviously former UFC champion, switched to Bellator and picked up the Bellator world title. And then there was, like, you know, it just felt big. It just, you know, she's a former Strikeforce, former Invicta, former UFC, and now Bellator champion. Like, that felt big and certainly added to her career. So I think a Bellator title could add a lot to Fabricio Werdum's career and is a lot more doable than a UFC title at this point. And again, the line, I think, is very important here because he's 42 years old. He's not young. So he given the fact that the heavyweight title fight between Cormier and Stipe still hasn't happened. It's coming up. And then you got Ngannou waiting in line. Then you got Curtis Blades waiting in line. The line is long. And at 42 years old, man, you got to start making things happen now. You can't just sit around and wait a few years. You just don't have that luxury. So to me, the Bellator move makes the most sense. But, you know, Scott Coker's the president of Bellator. He used to be the president of Strikeforce, so they obviously have had a previous relationship. I just think the Bellator move is a no-brainer. But look, if he stays in the UFC, you know, he probably keeps his gig as a UFC commentator job, which is important, right? And he could make a living out of that, especially if he decides to retire. So that's also something to keep in mind. And yeah, and it's nice to retire in the UFC, right? Say that, you know, you left being a UFC fighter. So that's nice as well. But in my opinion, the Bellator move is the best move for him. That's just how I see things. JS, I don't understand how people think Till won. Why are we having more fights like this now? It seems split when it's not. I don't know. I think the people that were supporting Till were really Till fans. I didn't really see many. Let me pull up MMA decisions here. This is a great website that tells you the scores of media members of fights. And usually, right, if you're a media member, you're supposed to be unbiased when it comes to these things. So I trust that, right? There might be some people that are biased, but holy shit, what the... A lot of people actually did score it for Till. I'm surprised. I had no idea this was a thing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 out of... Whoa, 50%. So 10 out of 20 media members actually scored it for Till. I had no idea. I thought it was kind of like fairly clear for Robert Whittaker. So this is how I saw it. And this is also how the judges saw it. So that's a good indication of, I'm properly scoring these fights, right? So I saw it that Darren Till won the first round 10-9, obviously dropped Robert Whittaker, connected with an elbow, clearly did the most damage of that round. Hard to deny that. Till won the first round. Then the next two rounds, round 2 and 3, I thought Whittaker comfortably won that. Like, I didn't feel too conflicted on who to give that round to at the end of the round. I was pretty comfortable giving it for Whittaker. And that is shown across all 3 judges' scorecards that I'm looking at right now, the official ones. So the first round they gave to Till, second and third for Robert Whittaker. Now, the 4th and 5th were really close. And when the fight was over, I'm like, I feel like Robert Whittaker won. And it makes sense for him to win because he really only needs one of those close rounds to go his way. Whereas Till literally needs both close rounds because he's only won one round to that point to go his way. So for 2 rounds that are close to go his way, it's a very unlikely chance. So for me, I felt fairly comfortable that Whittaker was going to win, and that was kind of my logic. And yes, I thought that much like they scored it here, I thought that Till won the last round, and that Till won the 4th round, and Whittaker took the last round. But those were close, man. Those were really close. But I did feel comfortable in giving the decision win to Robert Whittaker. So yeah, I guess I was calling people here biased, but a lot of media members scored it for Darren Till. So there you have it. I guess maybe they're seeing something that I'm not. Possible, but in my opinion, I didn't think it was a controversial decision. I didn't think so. All right. Amy Wee. Did you see Dan Hardy's long reaction to Herb Dean? Yes, I wrote about it on MMAJunkie.com. You can check that out there. Also invite you to check out Dan Hardy's video. It was pretty good and well made. I didn't see it all the way to the end, but I stopped, I think, at around where he was going through the Chris Weidman versus Luke Rockhold fight. I think at that point I already had enough information to kind of grasp his point, his idea, and turn that into an article. Anonymous Dude 123, who donated to the super chat. Thank you very much. He asks, Danny, have you heard of Venmo? It's a money app that doesn't take any percentage as YouTube does. I do, and I have Venmo, and I use that often here in New York with my friends and stuff like that. But I feel weird about asking people to Venmo me if they want me and stuff like that. It's weird. It's like an outside platform. I'd rather keep it here and within this platform, within this sort of, within YouTube. One, because it keeps also everything together with the little bit of money that I make from the ads that play on this. And also because I get to highlight your questions like this and give you a shout out for donating. So it's a plus. I don't want to be pulling up my Venmo and be like, yo, you see, guys? So yeah, no, I appreciate the sentiment, but this is where it's at, the YouTube super chat. Great week in MMA with a star, 100%. It's been a while, and I said this on Hablemos MMA on the Spanish, on MMA Junkies Spanish language podcast. I said this there. Last weekend felt for the first time like a normal weekend in my life because I had Bellator to cover on Friday and then UFC fights to watch on Saturday, and it's been a good while since I've experienced that. So for like a minute, like everything kind of felt back to normal. But then, you obviously have to step outside and wear a mask. So, you do get a little wake-up call there. But for a brief second, at some parts during that weekend, it did feel like everything was back to normal, which was kind of nice. So thank you, Bellator. Thank you, Bellator. I missed you guys. I really did. I see Danny hired a new stylist, looking good. Nice cleavage. Dude, I've actually not been lifting. I started good in the pandemic, like working out, doing push-ups. I got a pull-up bar. So I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that. Probably is a lot of turned into fat now, but dude, I got to get on. I got to start working out again. I got to start working out. I got to find time. And no, I don't have a stylist, but I appreciate the compliment. Jason Bass asking, should Gus make any changes if he wants to stay at heavyweight? I thought he came a little too heavy, but we didn't get to see too much of him. So 100% right. We didn't get to see too much of him, so it's hard to tell where he's at. But to be honest, I actually think that Gustafsson could have a pretty good career as a heavyweight and have a lot of success. I know some people disagree, but I guess we're gonna find out if he decides to continue fighting. But I have reasons to believe that he could be a very successful heavyweight. For starters, is that he has the frame of a heavyweight. Like, he's not short, right? Like, he has also a good amount of reach. He's one of the few people that give John Jones issues with reach, right? John Jones having the longest reach in the light heavyweight division. And that was basically because, and I'm saying, and that's obviously useful because at heavyweight, like, for example, he had a longer reach than Fabricio Werdum, and he was just as tall. So I didn't mind the size too much. A lot of people thought he came too heavy at 240. I think 240 is fine, just as long as you start training at 240, you start moving at 240, you measure your cardio at 240, right? Like, change your style to fight at 240, right? How do you perform with 35 extra pounds on you? So on that end, I wasn't too concerned about him coming heavy, But look, I think at heavyweight, he has obviously the size, like I said, the height, The reach is still heavyweight reach, even better than some heavyweights. He's far more agile than most heavyweights. His cardio is far better than most heavyweights. His speed is far better than most heavyweights. He might not have the knockout power, but if you're agile and you're fast and you can pepper guys with punches, and Gus still hits pretty hard, you can have a lot of success. Also at light heavyweight, he had a chin. He was never really known to be had a weak chin or anything like that. Like, I can't really remember, aside from the Anthony Johnson fight, with which Anthony Johnson has heavyweight power, in fact more power than some heavyweights. I can't really recall a time that Gustafsson got knocked out cold. He's always had a pretty good reach and has been able to take a good punch from pretty hard punchers like Daniel Cormier and John Jones and many others. So I think at 33 years old, that's very young for heavyweight. I mean, keep in mind he fought Fabricio Werdum, who's 42. I think, Gustafsson can have a nice career at heavyweight from everything that I mentioned. But again, we will only find out until he actually continues to fight there. So I actually have a lot of interest in Gustafsson at heavyweight. And like I said on Twitter that night, I don't think losing to Werdum via submission in the way that he did it doesn't say anything about his potential at heavyweight, because Fabricio Werdum can literally do that to absolutely anybody. He's the best submission guy in the heavyweight division, one of the best grapplers to ever compete in MMA, period. That guy can do what he did to Alexander Gustafsson to absolutely anybody on any given day. He can do it. So losing to Werdum says nothing. So anyways, what changes could he make at heavyweight? Nothing really, because again, we didn't see much in his fight. But again, I'd just like to see him again in another heavyweight fight. All right. Are you going to the beach? No, I wish. I got a shift right after this, but maybe in the coming days. I did go to the beach last weekend. Very nice. Juan Medina, te agradezco mucho todo el trabajo que haces. Muchas gracias. No, thank you, Juan Medina, and tune into Hablemos MMA. That podcast is going big. I'm telling you guys. It's a lot of fun doing it. I think, I've had this concept for some time now, and literally like putting this together was everything that I had in mind. From the artwork, that's exactly what I wanted, and shouts out to Evan Russell from USA Today for putting that together. Literally, I told him what I wanted, and he was just able to put that together and make it a reality. And also Adam Fish with the music and the sounds, like everything that I was looking for, he was able to find it and bring it to reality. The format, that's a format that I've wanted to have. And yeah, look forward to doing more episodes and to getting the podcast even bigger and having it be successful and go from there, and I think it's important for the space. I think, we need more content in the space, and I've heard from a lot of people that they really enjoyed it, they really liked it, and from fellow journalists to fighters to many others. So yeah, I'm gonna keep doing it, and I'm really excited about this project, and I appreciate all the love and support, and I really hope that it brings more attention to the Latin American scene, which obviously as a Latino, I feel that it's part of my duty, as a Latino working in this space and having the platform that I have to be able to shed some light on the Hispanic fighters that are very, very skilled, that are improving. Hispanic MMA has gone pretty far, and they're interesting personalities. A lot of them are immigrants moving to the U.S., hardworking people, and I hope to highlight that because I think I feel like it needs to be highlighted. So really excited about the show. So go subscribe. You can find it everywhere: iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcast, you can find Hablemos MMA there. So go subscribe. And also, if you're in I've heard from people that are learning Spanish. This is also a great opportunity to get some MMA content while learning Spanish. And because of my Colombian accent from Bogota, I've heard from many people. Again, I'm not saying this as for myself. I'm just telling you what people are saying, that the way I speak is usually makes it a lot easier to understand what I'm saying, to understand the Spanish, as opposed to maybe some other accents that you find across Latin America that might be a little thicker or might be a little faster. and making it a little harder to understand the Spanish. But shouts out. Ooh, Amy Wee, your favorite thing about Hablemos MMA? That's in Spanish. Spanish is my first language. I've been living in the U.S. Since I was little, since I was like 12 years old. So basically like a little bit more than half of my life at this point. But I always went back to Colombia. My parents mainly speak Spanish. My family mainly speaks Spanish. So I've always spoken Spanish. My friends are Hispanic, at least my best friends for the most part. So, obviously it's a very important thing for me, and it feels good to be able to bring content in my native tongue. It feels cool. It feels different. And yeah, I like it. I love it. And also, it's my little baby. It's my concept and my idea. So yeah, but my favorite thing is obviously being able to provide content to the Latino market on my first language, on my native tongue. So that's very important for me, and I'm very proud about that. And I feel very happy about that. All right, CP, and this is the last question before I got to dip out. CP asks, am I wrong to think Kelvin Gastelum is an elite at 185 pounds? I feel like his recent losses are more reflective of Till and Hermansson's upside, not signs of Gastelum's ability to get back to the title. I agree. I don't think that Kelvin Gastelum, I think he's an elite in some fights, not in every fight. I think his issue, and I think the Hermansson fight doesn't apply to this because it was so quick that like we didn't really see much. But in some fights, you see him fight and not live up to his potential. Like in some fights, you watch him fight and you go, dude, Kelvin's better than this. Kelvin's just better than this. Like he just is, period. Like we've seen him do better against similar caliber opposition. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it's injuries or personal life stuff or maybe just mentally, sometimes he just doesn't perform up to his potential. At least that's what it feels like to me. Like consistency is his issue. Because in some fights, like the Adesanya fight, like holy shit, like dude, you're one of the best in the world. Like if you do that to Adesanya, dude, you almost beat Adesanya. Like that's pretty big, dude. You have heart. Your boxing, dude. Kelvin Gastelum's boxing is beautiful. He's got tons of heart. He's tough as shit. He can wrestle. He's strong. Good submission defense for the most part. Good amount of experience as well. The dude's good. The dude's very good. But I think consistency's been his issue, and I think also the weight class has been his issue because he does seem a little bit undersized at 185, but it seems he has too many struggles making 170. So I feel like he's a guy that would maybe benefit of like an 175-pound division. Very much like a Kevin Lee, where you watch Kevin Lee in some fights he looks amazing, and in some other fights he just doesn't look that great, and you go, well, what's going on? Like you clearly have the potential, we see it, but you're just not able to put it together. I think that's and you can say the same thing about Kevin Lee, about being kind of stuck in between weight classes. Too short for 170, too big for 155. So that could be it as well, but yeah, we'll see. I still do believe in Kelvin Gastelum, and I do think that he could be a threat, and I do think that it's not far-fetched to think that he could one day get back to a spot where he's challenging for a belt. I don't think that's crazy. He's done it before. He can do it again, and he's still young. But yeah, I think Kelvin Gastelum is a very good fighter, and also he's facing really tough guys, really tough of position, like you mentioned there, CP. All right, that does it for this week's live Q&A. I appreciate everybody that tuned in. I appreciate people that donated on the super chat. Remember, like always, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe. Please share it and tell your friends about it. That's the best way to get this show out there and to help it grow. So I appreciate all the support, all the help, and I appreciate the accommodation for the day switch from Tuesday to Wednesday. And yeah, I'll keep you guys up to date when I do the next live Q&A. It'll probably be Tuesday, and I think I'm gonna keep this 10:30 a.m. Start time. I like it. I feel good drinking my coffee. It's a good way to start my day, and yeah, we'll see what happens as far as the time zone. I also like the 7:30 one, but it sometimes conflicts with my work schedule, which obviously is not good. So So I like the 10:30 a.m. for now. But anyways, keep it locked to my Twitter. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Danny Segura TV, Twitter at Danny Segura TV. And I will post everything that I do as far as my work there in MMA. And also I'll keep you guys up to date as to when I go live on these things. So thank you very much. I appreciate. Enjoy the fights this weekend. And I'll talk to you guys next week. All right.